Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about the fetters that tie us to rebirth. The root of these is coming from the defilements of greed, hatred and delusion. And expanding on that very concise list, we can see 10 fetters that are obstacles in the way of us attaining to enlightenment, which is freedom from suffering in this lifetime and rebirth into another. The beauty of the Buddha's teachings is there are many lists, and they're not just lists for lists' sake. If we have a project ourselves in business, socially, or even organising within our family lives, we might create a to-do list, something that is purely functional. Items: clean the house, go shopping, walk the dog. Something of this nature. In that list, there's no need to expand upon clean the house, rather. Write the list, could be one. Clean the house, walk the dog, do the shopping. We know what that means, we know what that entails. So the to-do list is a concise expression of a whole lot of activities and projects, things to do, to focus our attention on what needs to be done, actioned, and also a way of prioritizing. Now, faced with something as immense a question as what is the meaning of life? What's the point of all this? One could write a thesis, a huge explanation. But the Buddha's teachings simply break everything down into these beautiful, concise lists, taking all of that knowledge the Buddha acquired through his many lifetimes, and upon his enlightenment, the realization and recollection of those lifetimes of developing qualities and understanding, was able then to teach us in a very simple way that we could understand the Dharma. That is the nature of all things. So these lists are a perfect way of doing that. And one such list would be, following on from those 3 kilesas or defilements, greed, hatred, delusion, lobha, dosa, moha in the Pali words, the 10 fetters. These 10 fetters are what are needed to be eradicated in order to attain to enlightenment, similar to that of the Buddha. A total realization, development of wisdom and certain qualities, for which there is another list, the 7 factors of enlightenment. Like a to-do list, not expanding upon each factor in huge detail, but summarizing each factor by way of a list into 7 points. That we actually, when reading that simple one word of each point, understand the concept. For instance, satcha, Pali for truth. Khanti, Pali for patience. You don't need a thesis on patience. You don't need a thesis on truth. But the simple reminder of those being 2 of the 7 factors of enlightenment are sufficient to recall what it is the Buddha and Buddhism, its teachings, are instructing us to practice and to do. Our to-do list, to understand and see what it is that is the meaning of life. What it is that we can do to make a purpose out of this existence, to end our suffering within this lifetime and become free from rebirth. So my way of understanding Buddhism and thinking about Buddhism has always been not to expand upon subject matter. So someone says, oh, expand upon the nature of impermanence. Give us a talk, make a video about anicca. We know we're getting old, we're getting sick, we will die. We see a tree, its leaves falling in the autumn, a flower wilting in the vase. It's all impermanence, it's there, it can be understood, it needs no explanation. But it does need itemizing on a list so it is not forgotten. It's always foremost in our minds when giving consideration to the characteristics of this very existence. This is the support we need in order to direct our thoughts, our actions, our speech towards those that are constructive, to improving our mind states, purifying our minds. Ignorance is bliss, an expression you may have heard. Now, this can be used to imply burying one's head in the sand, you know, like an ostrich, so as it's not to see the problems going on around it. That kind of ignorance is bliss. And yes, it is, in an nihilistic kind of way. But also ignorance is, in fact, a form of wisdom. So, knowing that you don't know all of the answers is wisdom. But thinking you know, imagining, believing something is ignorance. Panya is wisdom, avijja is ignorance. Now, wisdom doesn't need to be a whole encyclopedic knowledge base of information. It simply has to be understanding. This is why these lists are so helpful. They give us point-by-point reference to what we already know, but allow us to start with a clean slate. If you like, a mind of ignorance, empty, without knowledge, because knowledge can be, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, another expression, can be an obstruction. By far the easiest people to explain the Dharma to, in its simplest form, but also its most complex form, the basic and the most advanced of the Buddhist teachings are the same thing, the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. The easiest people it is to explain that to are those that are not brought up with the Dharma, those that have no understanding of Buddhism, those that are not filled with preconceived ideas, teachings, practices, cultural influences, traditions. This dogmatic approach and religious approach to what is, after all, just a simple education system, a simple philosophy or way of living that the Buddha points us in the direction of. Uncluttered, the mind can receive such teachings with a clean slate and understand them more easily. So those of us with more experience in the Buddhist world must always remind ourselves by making good use of these lists to sometimes clear the decks and look at things point by point. The Four Noble Truths. 4. The Noble Eightfold Path. 8. In between that, the 5 khandhas, the 6 senses or sense bases. The lists go on forever, but they interrelate. They're all a part of each other, coming from the Four Noble Truths. So this list, beginning with the first, which is pointing us in the right direction of wisdom, is these are 10 things we need to eradicate, cut off at the root. the root being those root defilements, kilesas of greed, hatred and delusion. So as they cannot pull the roots up actually, so they cannot regrow. There is no seed for a future. Once they're fully extinguished, they take us on steps, 4 steps towards enlightenment. And I'm just going to explain those in some simple steps. We're using single, simple words that you'll already understand and warrant no further explanation. So we're looking to eradicate these things, these 10 things. Firstly, ego or personality view. Thinking that this physical body, this thinking brain, are something that is a personality. Something that is permanent and may go on, but essentially is not. It's subject to aging, sickness, death, decay, dysfunctionality. Personality view, an ego. This idea has to be abandoned. If we cling to that idea, we are putting in place the causes and conditions for clinging to physical well-being, health, clinging to youth, clinging to life. We can enjoy youth, we can enjoy physical well-being, we can enjoy life, but we mustn't become intoxicated by it. We mustn't let our clarity of vision be clouded by it. We must know it as impermanent, temporary. So knowing and understanding this is a temporary state enables us to abandon personality view. So the number 1 of these 10 fetters that has to be abandoned is ego or personality view, followed by doubt. So doubt in the Dharma, in the teachings of the Buddha, but doubt in these absolute facts, these characteristics of existence, starting with the 4 Noble Truths. If you have a doubt that there is any suffering, there is doubt there. It's those 4 Noble Truths that underlie this practice. You have to accept, no, there is suffering. Whilst we have a physical body and a thinking brain, there will always be suffering, until we eradicate, cut off at the root, all of these fetters. But whilst we believe there is anything other than suffering without cutting off at the root these fetters, we're living in a deluded state. You see where all of these points are coming from: greed, hatred and delusion, essentially. The only list you need is those 3. But breaking it down, expanding upon it slightly, but in a simple way, we can apply it to the stages of enlightenment. Because when we eradicate doubt, we can also see and understand that there is also a need to eradicate the need or the belief in rites and rituals as being part of something we practice in order to improve either our current existence or our future rebirth, or get external help towards what is actually causing our suffering at the moment. Now, chanting, bowing, offering candles, incense, flowers are all good, wholesome actions of generosity or mindful activities of body, speech and mind, purifying the mind to some extent, helping develop wholesome mind states and reduce unwholesome mind states, but in themselves produce nothing more than that awareness of good actions and nice, pleasant, enjoyable things to do. If you believe those actions will ensure a future happy rebirth, if you believe those actions send you to heaven or stop you going to hell, then you are, again, living in a state of delusion. That belief, that faith, that wrong faith, blind faith in rites and rituals has to be abandoned also. Those first 3 fetters, ego, doubt, rites and rituals, once eradicated, are the first stage of enlightenment. And that's all. That's all there is to it. In Pali it's called Sotapanna. Sotapanna is, we translate it in English to stream entry. I'm not sure that that's particularly accurate by way of a translation, but it's easy to understand. This stream, figuratively speaking, we're referring to here, is a stream or a river. We're on the mainland and there's a beautiful peaceful island across the water where there is no suffering, and it's Nibbana. This is what we're aiming for, Nibbana. And to get there, we need to enter this stream in order to be able to cross it. We have to abandon the world behind us, the mainland, and enter this stream and head to the island of Nibbana. So this is where these funny phrases come from. Stream enterer. First stage of enlightenment. Sotapanna, stream enterer, the first stage of enlightenment, requires you to abandon ego, doubt, and rites and rituals. Now, the next stage of enlightenment comes about from abandoning the next two of these fetters. So the first three, ego, doubt, rites and rituals, and you can write these down. Take notes. I never encourage that, but if you want to remember these, or you can Google them, the 10 fetters. This is a good list to remember because it's a to-do list of what we're doing with the practice, what we're looking to eradicate in order to become a stream enterer. Without the eradication of those first three, you are not entering the stream. You will not be going to Nibbana. To remain in the stream, one has to eradicate then sensual desire and aversion or ill will. So going back to those root defilements, greed is where sensual desire comes from. Hatred is where ill will or aversion comes from. Varying degrees of those root defilements. And this can't be done in one go. It's a slow progression, slowly eradicating. So once we've reduced sensual desire, once we've reduced ill will or aversion, we are beginning to enter the second stage of enlightenment we call once returner, Sakadagami. Now once returner means you've entered the stream, even got to the island, but you've come back. You've come back to the other side, or you're floating around in the middle of this figurative river somewhere, I don't know. You're always going against the stream, the currents, the prevailing currents, because the prevailing currents are that of this worldly life, the mainland behind us, samsara, where we're encouraged to develop our bodies physically, our minds intellectually, to acquire material possessions, to acquire success, growth in both riches, intellect, fame and fortune. All of these things that the Buddha is saying we can actually renounce and leave on the mainland, crossing the stream towards peace and Nibbana. So with a reduction of sensual desire, a reduction of ill will, we enter the second stage of enlightenment, Sakadagami. But when they are fully eradicated, there is no sensual desire and no ill will. We become a non-returner, anagami. This is the third stage of enlightenment, which are very high and lofty states of attainment. Most of our lives, even if you're able to enter Sotapanna, might be dedicated towards just trying to reduce sensual desire, trying to reduce aversion, just reducing a little bit of liking, reducing a little bit of disliking. This can take many lifetimes. When they're completely eradicated, and only then, along with the first three fetters, you've eradicated 5 fetters, half, and you are an anagami, a non-returner. you're getting to the island without having to return to the mainland, because sensual desire is not drawing you back. Craving, thirst, a need for those sensual pleasures we had in samsara. So you're cutting off what it is that ties us, the fetters that tie us to rebirth. This is what it all means. An arahant has another 5 fetters to cut off at the root. And these are by far the very hardest, as you might expect. Saying that, in the interim period between Sotapanna and Arahant, so stream enterer and someone who's got to the island, fully enlightened being, that person will not be reborn, has attained to Nibbana, has a glimpse of Nibbana, experienced Nibbana, and on death will experience Parinibbana, no return to samsara, no future rebirth into any realm. That arahant has eradicated any notion or concept of any material, so physical rebirth, obviously, that's easier to understand, any immaterial, so spiritual rebirth. They've already eradicated the idea of a personality, a soul that is, which implies inherent personality traits that is being reincarnated, as opposed to what it is that's reborn in Buddhism, just a mind, a knowing, an awareness, the citta, without said caused and conditioned personality traits or any evidence of those. Only what remains is any qualities one has developed by way of loving kindness, compassion, anything detailed in these lists, factors of enlightenment, qualities we develop, as opposed to attributes of personality that were abandoned in the first stages of enlightenment. Cut off. This has to be understood. This idea of immaterial spiritual rebirth has to be understood. That after this life, we cannot know, because of course you will not be reborn, so we haven't been reborn. We may have had a glimpse of emptiness, sunyata. We may have had a glimpse of nibbana even, but we haven't experienced parinibbana. So this is where it's okay to not know. This is where it's okay to have ignorance. This is where it's like, it's okay, it's in fact it's much preferable to not know the ending of a book, not know how a movie ends. You wouldn't watch it, you wouldn't read it if you knew the end. Similarly, we can't know what happens after we die. We can gain recollection of previous lives and therefore see that we're reborn after we die if we haven't cut off at the root all of these fetters. So this, the 7th immaterial rebirth, spiritual rebirth, has to be abandoned. And then conceit, comparison, whilst you're still within this existence, a living being, interacting with others, socializing, or living in a community of monks and nuns, or living alone with just other beings. Any examination of, by way of comparison to others, or belief in oneself that one is either better, inferior, or equal to, is what in Buddhism we call conceit. So it doesn't just mean conceited people are or above everyone else. Conceit can also mean they consider themselves below others or equal to. Any belief in this, it's not the same as personality view, which, if you remember, was abandoned right at the beginning there. It's a fundamental aspect of right view, along with karma, rebirth, and therefore wisdom, panya. But it is just a comparison of one's qualities one's experience in relation to other beings. This too must be abandoned, the eighth. Thoughts of what next? What happens now? What more should I do? So often people say to me, I've got to this stage of my meditation. What should I do now? You continue to do nothing. What that is restlessness coming up. It's thinking about, I've got this far, it's so good. I've got piti, I've got sukha, I'm approaching jhana. Now what do I do? As soon as this what next comes up, question, what do I do? You're back to square one. You've climbed the snakes, you climb the ladders and you're going straight back down a snake again in the famous game of snakes and ladders. Because you are thinking of becoming, attaining to, wanting, grasping, clinging. You're me-making, my-making, ahankara, mamankara, lovely Pali word. You're trying to be something, do something. So that's completely taking you back to the beginning of that meditation. You continue to do nothing. This natural tendency of us, this natural nature of inquiry we have as human beings, this tendency towards complexity that we have as human beings can be summed up as restlessness, really. Restlessness and worry, like in the 5 hindrances that are obstacles in our meditation. But more specifically, restlessness is the tendency towards complication, which is why Buddhism becomes so complicated. There are so many books that are so long. There are so many essays and examinations and people with huge lengths of qualifications in various aspects of Buddhism, which is wonderful to have such in-depth analysis on the subject available to us. But also it can be an obstruction to the path. It can cloud the issue. It can complicate things. So we've suddenly got, rather than a clean slate, a blank slate, a clean tabletop, we've all of a sudden got everything everywhere jumbled up on the table or in front of us, a cluttered mind full of all of these ideas. And this restlessness too, this tendency towards complication, is the 9th of the fetters that has to be cut off at the root. In a way, it comes as a result of greed for knowledge, the first of those defilements. But it's actually very much, well, probably the only way we can really identify and see the nature of delusion. Restlessness as well as doubt, they come from delusion. Not being able to see the forest for the trees. Or seeing there a forest, you see, beautiful forest, not realizing, well, it's just made up of trees. If you look at the beauty in the tree, you're seeing what makes up the forest. So rather than, through the nature, our tendency towards complexity, going outwards and expanding into a whole forest that you can really only get an overall aerial picture of and have no detail or method in, these lists bring us into a focus point of the necessary factors that come together and ultimately manifest in the forest, but are the necessary ingredients, or, in fact, the things we have to do step by step to move towards enlightenment. So restlessness can be seen as all kinds of things, interpreted as all kinds of ideas, but anything that's more complicated than simply understanding the Four Noble Truths and following the Noble Eightfold Path in its simplest way and form of sila, moral virtue, samadhi, meditation, and panya, developing wisdom, is a form of restlessness coming from delusion, thinking you can add information to the subject. Put more ingredients into the pot and it'll improve the stew. It won't. It'll spoil the stew. Leave it as it is, simple in its ingredients, simple to understand, and also simple to do. This is what a to-do list is. If you had a to-do list which each point had expansive essays to describe what it is you have to do, it wouldn't be a to-do list. It would be a book of paragraphs, a book of chapters, a manual that wouldn't be useful. But also, this is how we should approach our knowledge base, our intellect, the way we organize our mind states. How else do we stop them being restless? How else do we bring order to the chaos of our thinking brain than to rein it in somewhat with the use of these wonderful lists that the Buddha leaves us here, gives us, provides us with, to just structure our information and our understanding of that information towards a focus point. And finally, with all of this understanding, you eradicate the 10th fetter of avijja, ignorance. So you're beginning with ignorance, a blank slate, putting just the right ingredients, just the right information upon it in order to eradicate ignorance. But our tendency, because we're human, as a result of greed and the need to be and become, me-making, my-making, is to get as much as we can into the pot, write as much as we can scribbled onto the board. Write as long an essay as we possibly can, as long a statement, question, comment we can come up with. It means we're cleverer, you have better understanding. But this isn't what the Buddha's teaching us, is it? He's asking us to sit here, like this, sit still, and watch the breath. What's complicated about that? Oh, there's so many reasons you can't do that. No, there aren't. You can do it anywhere. You can do it at any time, with anyone or alone. You don't need any accessories. It's very simple, isn't it? Anapanasati. Satipatthana. The 4 foundations of mindfulness. Again, 4 things. Mindfulness of the body, feelings. Mindfulness of the mind. Mindfulness of phenomena, dharma. 4 things. Those words explain themselves. You don't need a book, Satipatthana. The sutta is long enough, explaining the 4 foundations of mindfulness. But once you get a grip, an understanding of that, what we should be mindful on, you know you're being mindful of aspects of the body, the physical body, and feelings resulting from that. The mind, emotions, qualities we develop within it, and all phenomena, dharma, we experience. As these lists are seen, as they're read, absorbed, understood, they don't need to be added to or complicated. So there already we've gone through the 10 fetters in their simplest form, which is the only form they need to be understood. They're coming from greed, hatred and delusion. Having established the first 5, a non-returner, an anagami, you are well placed to eradicate the final 5. But sensual desire and aversion are gently, gradually eroded. Now, these don't have to all be step by step. Right, first I get rid of ego, then doubt, then rites and rituals, then sensual desire, then ill will, then material rebirth, then immaterial rebirth, then conceit, then restlessness, then ignorance. No. We're developing an understanding of all those with the simple practice of sila, samadhi, panya, moral virtue, meditation, and development of wisdom. But what will naturally happen, and the reason this particular breakdown has come about, and this labeling, which is not necessary and shouldn't be gripped and held onto as being so important, of these stages of enlightenment, is because it's explaining in hindsight what is actually can be expected the order to be of them completely being eradicated. All of these fetters will be gradually eroded, reduced. But they might be eradicated first with the simple understanding that we're really not this physical body or thinking brain. Now, if you can't do that and you think you are, and you'll be reborn in heaven as you are, then you've got a way to go to develop right view. If you have doubts about the Four Noble Truths, similarly, a way to go before you have right view. And rites and rituals too. So those first three might most likely be what you can easily abandon and establish stream entry, the first stage of enlightenment, sotapanna. Then you can only gradually reduce through a process of patience, through a process of renunciation, your lifestyle, and this is where one might need to adopt more ascetic practices, keeping 8 precepts rather than 5, or even looking towards a life as a renunciant, monastic life, a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni. An arahant needs, having eradicated all of these, no support of worldly things, material values, has attained to enlightenment and is across the stream, never to return, on the island. But they will need to maintain their physical body in order for their thinking brain to function. They need food, clothing, shelter, medicine, just the 4 requisites, which is why they have to ordain to be supported in that state as an arahant for the rest of their life, when they may teach, as the Buddha did for 45 years. The Buddha, because he was fully awakened. Sama Sambuddha, because he was perfectly awakened. There was no Buddhism. It comes as a result of his awakening to these 4 Noble Truths and this idea of what arahantship awakening really is, having eradicated at the root these 10 fetters. That's the Buddha's legacy, what we can all benefit from just by having these to-do lists. So next to your to-do list on the fridge that says shopping, cleaning, laundry, etc., have ego, doubt, rites and rituals for today, and then tomorrow, reducing sensual desire and ill will. And then for the next day, material rebirth, immaterial rebirth, conceit, restlessness, ignorance. By Friday, you're an arahant. Don't forget to walk the dog though, or go shopping, or do the laundry, because without these material supports, you'll fester, become ill. We still have to look after the body that the chitta has attached to, the mind has attached to. Like our vehicle, we look after it. We want it to run, to get us from A to B, to serve its purpose, as with this body. So even the arahant doesn't give up and let the body decay. It isn't an nihilistic practice of just going, well, I'll go to sleep now, or I'll sit in absorbed meditation in jhana for the rest of my time here. Because you're still, until the death of the body, responsible for its upkeep, its maintenance, the fuel it runs on, food. So today, in this maybe slightly shorter video, I wanted to just cover in a talk a simple way of looking at what it is we're all trying to attain to ultimately, without pushing it away, without saying, oh, nibbana, enlightenment, that was for the forest masters of old, that was for the arahants in the time of the Buddha. One can never be free from suffering in this lifetime with this modern world, it's so difficult. Well, the news is the ancient world was difficult also for different reasons, and many of the same reasons: wars, famine, disease, fighting, aggression, sexual deviance and misconduct, all of these things going on. Now we have access to more information, so we see it on mass global scales. But even back in the time of the Buddha, whether it's global or local, it is all still the same problems resulting from greed, hatred and delusion. However complicated life you think now is by comparison to the time of the Buddha, it's absolutely no different. It's still just greed, hatred and delusion that needs to be eradicated, cut off at the root, to be free from suffering and rebirth into worldly life. So that's a nice, concise list that has come from the collected teachings of the Buddha in the suttas, and there are so many such lists we can refer to, and it's good to have a little notebook or somewhere on your whatever device where you keep an idea in simple language that you understand, terminology that you understand, of all of these lists, beginning with the three characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, or impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, no self, the Four Noble Truths, the five khandhas, six sense bases, seven factors of enlightenment, or it goes on. Whatever is appropriate, they all interlace. You'll see common words coming up. If you're using the Pali, it does help to get an understanding of the Pali words with these lists, because they often don't translate well into our own mother tongues without using a few words of explanation. So if we have a Pali word, it's commonly understood throughout the Buddhist world, and it's also a good summary once you have your own interpretation and meaning of it as a reminder. So I only need to think anicca, dukkha, anatta. I don't need to think of big sentences of each word. Again, bringing it back down to the lowest common denominator, the hub, the basis from which the information's coming, the ingredients, stripping it down to what we need, what we can use. And then we have functional, practical, usable lists that are directions for our future, and ways we behave, things we do, and clearly there to see what the results of those actions of body, speech and mind will be, ultimately in Nibbana. So on that note, I hope it's useful. If not, then just let it go. Come back next time though, try again, but don't let it bother you, put it down, and in the meantime, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.